On this episode of the Ministry of Motion Pictures podcast.
But I just want to make sure not to brand ourselves as a faith-based company.
Okay.
That's we putting out projects. But with that said, we're a company that's focused on putting out and supporting diverse voices. And in my opinion, faith-based films are part of that diversity that we want to celebrate and support.
You're listening to the Ministry of Motion Pictures podcast, where we call faith-based filmmakers to cinematic excellence, bold storytelling, and sound theology. I'm writer-director and your host, Todd Schaefer. We have an exciting episode today, and one that may be marking a very interesting development in the film industry. Would you ever consider a faith filmmaker a voice of diversity? Well, it is, at least for a new independent film company called Mutiny Pictures. Mutiny is a new effort founded by Colleen Butler and producer Ben Yennie, who was my guest on this podcast back in April. Ben has been focused on helping independent filmmakers navigate the shark-infested waters of Hollywood. And now he's taking the next step by forming a company that will develop, market, and distribute their own projects. Colleen was part of the marketing effort of The Passion of the Christ. She spent many years working in marketing and development, and now she's the head of development at Mutiny. In this episode, we'll spend some time getting to know Colleen, talking with her about the marketing campaign for Passion, and then Ben is going to join us to talk about Mutiny Pictures. This is episode 39. Colleen, welcome to the podcast. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and some of your experience in marketing?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having us. This is so exciting. So my career, I started off doing media planning for studios, some of the larger ones like Warner Brothers, and doing radio plans and Miramax. Then I actually started in my junior year of college doing this. And then I moved to Los Angeles, followed the dream of working for studios there. And I got hired at this place called the S. Callen Company. And that company specializes in independent films. So I worked with studios such as IFC, IDP, Newmarket Films, Sundance Channel.
Wow.
And I worked on so many different independent films at this job. And what I learned was the specialty of marketing for these films and how important it is to have the right distributor for certain films. And I think how I got connected with you is that I, at that time, worked on The Passion of the Christ. And right. That one was released by Newmarket Films, and who was heading up the studio at the time was Bob Burney. And I had met Bob when he was at IFC back when I was still in college, and I worked with him there. And Bob was just, at the time, they called him the man with the golden touch in the independent film world. He was amazing, and put out this film, and it just took on a life of its own. And I think Bob knew it was going to do well, because he acquired it. But I think the world at the time was shocked by how well this did. It's the highest grossing independent film of the time. And so it was at that job that I really learned how to market independent films. And I thought, it'd be interesting to talk to you about this film in relation to marketing independent films in general, because a lot of what I learned at this job applies to faith-based films, because most of them are independent at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So, it was an incredible project to work on, for sure. It lasted about, I think, weeks. Pretty insane.
So Passion was a really unique project. I remember people saying that this thing was not going to do well at the box office. It was Mel Gibson's folly, because he'd spent so much money on it, and he was doing just crazy things with it. Like, it was coming out as an R-rated film. It was politically incorrect. It was in Latin, and everyone just thought this thing was going to dog at the box office. But you guys somehow pulled it together. You had a great product. You believed in the product. Talk to me about what actually happened there, because I'm sure there's a lot of people curious about how this film managed to enter the marketplace and do so well.
So I think for this project, it was a team effort. The booker for this movie. So the booker is the person who books all the theaters, right? He just managed to really know in depth like the markets where this would do well, right? We started off with like the major markets, I think, and then we moved into the smaller markets, and he got us into 3,000 theaters, which is pretty incredible for an independent film, right? To go into that many theaters.
Yeah.
So that aspect of it did really well. And then also on the publicity end, at the time, Bob Burney's wife, Jeannie Burney, was working publicity, and she, did a lot of reach out, which is something that I can touch on later in this, is working with churches, getting the local big congregations, some of the smaller congregations, to get maybe advanced screening to go see the film, getting publicity in that end. So I think that really made a difference for this film, is reaching those markets that usually don't get big releases like this. So, and then it just took on a life of its own after that. It really, like I said, it lasted for about 46 weeks, and we ran, so my job in this was doing the print campaign. And so we ran it in these markets across the country and newspaper ads. And I think that worked really well as well, because again, back then there weren't Facebook groups, there weren't these online groups that people have now. So print was really the best way to reach these people back then.
Wow. Yeah, it's hard to imagine that was so long ago that print was still huge.
Yeah. Yeah, it came out. Yeah, I was surprised by how long, because all these years blend together, and I was like, wow, it came out quite a while ago, and there hasn't been anything like that.
Yeah.
That really moved out beyond the faith-based audience into the mainstream. And I just feel like there's such an opportunity with these types of films to branch out like that one did.
I mean, I think it not only came out as a really strong faith-based film, but I think it came out as a film that had all the wrong ingredients, and yet because it had a really good director behind it who had a very strong vision and was able to pull a good story together, it sort of demonstrated the strength of just having a good person behind a project that may not look good on paper or may not pitch well, but has a potential for success that isn't anticipated.
Right. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I'm sure it was a tough sell just based alone on having subtitles, right?
Yeah.
You have this ancient language, and I'm sure there were people trying to convince him not to use the subtitles, but
Yeah.
it worked. I just watched it, like I said, earlier this week, and it's such a powerful film. And it's the most important story from the Bible, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
of course, I think in that regard it would have gotten attention, but because of the powerful performances and the use of language, and obviously the cinematography is amazing. I think all of that coming together and finding the right distributor is what really made the difference for this film, because it took the audience really seriously, and brought this film that people were eager to see, and in the correct way.
So your marketing work on this, was this unusual compared to other things that you had done before in marketing films, or was it the same kind of approach?
Yeah, so the thing that I loved about working at this particular company was I worked on the broad range of independent films. So at the same time as I was working on Passion of the Christ, I had also released Monster, which was a Charlize Theron movie where she won the Academy Award.
Mm-hmm.
And that one was also somewhat controversial. It was somewhat violent. It was about the serial killer, prostitute, so way different audience. And that was released by the same studio that released Passion of the Christ.
Oh, okay.
And also the same studio released Whale Rider, which was another film set in New Zealand, with this indigenous community. But that one also took on a life of its own. I don't think they were expecting that one to be as popular. And I worked on Super Size Me. I don't know if you remember that documentary where he went. Yeah, he ordered everything supersized at McDonald's for a year. And so all of those four movies just had such different audiences. So I think to get back to your question, I think it's just really learning. I learned really how to market independent films and really do each film justice individually, like just looking at the film itself, like where would this movie be a fit?
Right.
Who would be most likely to see that?
So how did you and Ben now come together? And tell me a little bit about this company that you're forming together.
Colleen and I met through a mutual contact named Debbie Brubaker, who's essentially the queen of San Francisco independent film. She is known for being a line producer, UPM, and co-producer on films like Big Eyes, Blue Jasmine, When We Rise, Sorry to Bother You. And Debbie and I have been friends for quite a while. We produced a few workshops together, and eventually she just brought Colleen to one of the financing workshops I did. We had a meeting after, and it got on like a house on fire, and we've been working together since, and it's been a bit over a year.
Yeah, it seems like you two were sort of made for each other. As I'm hearing, I know your background, Ben, and I hear her background and your strong desire for independent film. That seems like it's a good match. So tell me a little bit about Mutiny.
So Mutiny is a partnership between 4 people, mainly. There's me and Colleen, and there's also Michael and Josh. And Josh was the director of a film called Goodland, and that I represented, and Michael was the person who distributed it. And he did a fantastic job on that movie. And after he left where he was at the time that we were working on that movie together, he asked if we wanted to join forces and start something new. And I brought Colleen on because we all thought it would be a really good idea to have more of a development and marketing arm, because her contacts are different from Michael's. So between all of us, we have a really functional company with really deep penetration throughout the industry.
So what kind of project are you looking to be doing?
At this point, we're really looking for anything that we feel we can do a really good job of selling. And Michael, since I was last on your podcast, Todd, we found out that Michael actually has a decent track record in selling faith-based films. And that's something that he did as a subsidiary of his past company. And he's done a lot with selling church screenings, as well as just working on, as well as doing promotional campaigns and direct outreach through organizations like K-Love and some other stuff there. So we spoke with him, and he'd be very interested in working on more faith-based content. We're probably going to be pretty picky to start about it, because anytime you're dipping your toes into a new market, you kind of have to be.
Between Michael and Colleen, you guys got a pretty strong force with experience in the faith-based market. So it seems like you'll be doing a lot of faith-based.
No, I think, what Ben said, I mean, I think we're going to be doing a lot of independent-based film, right? All independent.
Okay.
But I think we are going to be picky. You know, I would love to do another Passion of the Christ, but I think if we were to take a serious look at a project, they should have, a strong script. Things like having a name attached. Obviously, Mel Gibson made a big difference with that. But we'd be looking for projects along those lines, ones that would be easier to sell more on the mass market kind of side. But we would take a look at everything, but I just want to make sure not to brand ourselves as a faith-based company.
Okay.
That's we put in out projects. But with that said, we're a company that's focused on putting out and supporting diverse voices. And in my opinion, faith-based films are part of that diversity that we want to celebrate and support. So, and also, like I said earlier, they are independent films too at the end of the day. So in that regard, we will be supporting them. And I think with Michael and I, with our experience on these films, we could really do justice, and it would be in good hands if we were to find a solid project with a faith-based kind of focus like that.
Right. So other than Passion of the Christ, are there any other faith-based films that sort of tickle your fancy as the kind of film you'd be looking for?
Well, I think we're really looking for atypical takes on the standard faith-based narrative, kind of like how Passion was, but things that aren't just Bible verse guides to plot point, to the first plot point, then to the second, to the third, all of that. We're looking for things that are a little bit more breaking from the traditional redemptive arc and adding a little bit more of other cinematic elements like thriller elements. Comedy elements are really good if they're actually funny, and can have a decent level of appeal there, but that's always subjective, so it's kind of hard to tell. But adding things that aren't necessarily just drama, feel bad followed by feel good, and have some other strong arcs and emotions in them, I think are things that we'd be really interested in exploring with and for the faith-based community.
I think you're hitting a part of the market that really isn't being touched much.
Yeah, and I think between Michael and I, we really could do justice on a film, get it across the country. Especially in these times, we're in this global pandemic. It's like, what's going on with theaters? I still think we could hit it out of the park, even with what's going on between the two of us, getting it to these communities. So, I mean, I'd love to see, scripts, like Ben said, that really have a unique take on there's so many powerful stories in the Bible, and interesting, simple stories too, ones that would make great films. So I just love to see projects like that, and projects that really, I guess, could appeal beyond just a faith-based audience.
My take on some of the faith-based is it would satisfy itself being sort of like a Hallmark Channel production rather than a cinematic theatrical film. And it sounds to me like you guys are looking for the cinematic kinds of films that aren't just serving a story for the sake of meeting a faith-based requirement, but it's actually a film, and it's using all the grammar and elements of good filmmaking to tell a good story.
Exactly. Yeah, you said it right. Just going to say, Todd, it's interesting, when I was preparing to speak with you, I was looking at the projects we have in development, and we actually have somewhat of a faith-based element to a couple of the scripts we're working on right now. One of them is D.B. Cooper. I don't know, are you familiar with D.B. Cooper, Todd?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so D.B. Cooper is considered one of it's the most famous hijacking story from the 70s. And it's unsolved, completely unsolved. So this man hijacked a plane and had asked the FBI for what the equivalent is of $1 million in today's money. And he has asked for multiple parachutes, and he ended up jumping from the plane and escaping in the woods of Washington. And so our story that we're developing is told from the perspective of the flight attendant who sat next to D.B. Cooper throughout the whole flight. All we have on D.B. Cooper is just one police sketch that Tina Mucklow, the main character in our story, had put together. So she had sat next to him for the equivalent about 2 hours of this flight, negotiating with the FBI. She was lighting his cigarettes while he had his finger on the trigger for a bomb that he was going to set off and, kill everyone on the plane. So Tina Mucklow actually became a nun in real life. She lives in Oregon, and so the story actually has a lot of faith in it because of Tina You know, she carried a Bible with her everywhere she went, and she'd pray while she was sitting next to DB Cooper. So we have that element in the script, and I thought that was interesting when I was looking at our projects. I was like, wow, we actually have some faith-based elements in our projects at the moment. And her story is so interesting, and I love this take of DB Cooper is telling it from her point of view.
Interesting. So, in your faith-based films, are you looking for things that are real stories about real people? Are you looking for things that are more fictional, or it doesn't matter to you?
I don't think it matters. I think it is, as long as it's a good story.
Okay.
You know, what do you
Good.
think, Ben?
Yeah, I agree. On the acquisitions front, a couple of our upcoming releases also have at least some degree of faith elements in them as well. I wouldn't go so far as to call them faith-based films, but one of them in particular deals with guardian angels in a pretty heavy way.
Yeah, we don't have any faith-based films right now, I don't think, in our life. Yeah. They're all
No, there are a fair few with elements of it.
Which is actually something a lot of faith-based filmmakers want to do. They don't want to be sort of pigeonholed into the faith-based, rubric that we have now. They want to be branching out into other things that are telling strong stories. And
I would say that in general, that's probably a good instinct, even if it makes it slightly harder to sell. I just said to anyone listening who's in the process of developing their film, I would say it's probably worth considering that there is a line where it is no longer really a faith-based film at all. So it's important to keep in mind that you have to learn what rules you can and can't break. I know a lot of filmmakers feel like the general faith-based rubric is pretty strict and hard to follow, but there are still some things that you have to understand what you can and can't do before you alienate your demographic entirely.
I think some of those guidelines they can be fudged, and I think if they're done well, if you break them well, then you don't need those guidelines, because I know about those guidelines. And different studios have different guidelines for what they will do and what they won't do. But to me, if there's a really good story, it's going to find an audience somewhere.
I completely agree. And whenever we are talking about releasing a film, we start with the largest core audience we can reasonably reach in a cost-effective way. And that's why this faith-based distinction matters. If you are a person of faith, and you at least somewhat, and you want to keep elements of faith in your films, it would be wise to keep enough elements of those in your films that you can start with that core audience, because they're more likely to accept it,
right,
and actually buy it. And that's the only way you're going to be able to grow out of that niche, is if you can find an echo chamber through which you can rise above the white noise. And I meant echo chamber, not echo chamber. But yeah,
it sounded cool.
So yes.
So what kind of budget range are you looking at in terms of these films?
If we're talking about acquiring completed films, we'll look at basically anything. It just comes down to marketability and production quality. And like, if you make a film that meets everything we need in a safe manner, for $500, we'll probably distribute it. It's hard to do that. But if you can, great. When it comes to distributing when it comes to more development, that's a bit more of a subjective question that I feel like I might punt over to Colleen.
I think for me, it would just come down to the story, who's attached, the names. So I'd be open to any budget. You know, if it helps to sell it if there's some sort of castability attached to it. So if there's a
Sure.
strong role, then we probably, so part of my job in development is not just helping with get the script in, you know, in a good place, but it's also bringing to the table the elements I think that would help us fund it or sell it. So I would look at it that way, like where could I find a home for this film? Is the story strong enough to attract some level of talent that could help me sell it? A director that could really, you know, bring together the story. So it'd be, you know, just really looking at the whole picture, but it starts with having the strong story. And then I think going from there, I think during this time with COVID and everything, budgets are all going up. I would say by a third at the very least, just to do protocols. So wow. I think what's considered an independent film budget-wise is changing because of COVID. So it's going to be interesting to see. But yeah, I'll be looking at some of that too. You know, what is realistic to shoot right now? You know, so I'll be looking at some of that too when I review story or scripts. Is how, you know, if it has big crowd scenes, for instance, that's going to increase the budget. You know, but I'll look at anything, like Ben said. If it's a strong story, I would just come to the table and try to figure out what elements I could add to it that would help me sell it or pitch it places.
So if someone came to you with Passion of the Christ before it was made, what would your take be?
I would do exactly what they did, you know, bring someone on a name like Mel Gibson, you know. That's kind of what I'm doing, like for DB Cooper, to be honest. You know, it's an independent film, but you know, I'm trying pitching it out to, you know, big name directors that are interested in real life stories, action real life stories. So, you know, you can think, I'm sure as a movie watcher yourself, you know, you can think of, in your mind, of directors that have put forth those kinds of movies. So that's probably what I would have done, is, you know, Mel Gibson, bring in a Jim Caviezel, you know, a strong actors and talent. And then I know that Mel had trouble selling that one, which is amazing to me. Yeah. But I think he probably met Bob and just knew Bob could do it justice. And that's kind of how I feel about our company, you know, Mutiny Pictures, is that we can do justice to these movies. You know, we can put them out in a way that makes sense for each movie. We look at each movie in its own silo, you know, and really take care of each filmmaker and film so they can continue to do the work that they do well, you know.
Right. So how many films are you looking to produce or acquire or release each year?
Let's start with releasing, because there's a lot more separation than you might think between the development and acquisition and distribution arms. But for releasing, our end goal, which we won't make this year, is to release one top level prestige A-level release per month, one that's slightly below that, and then 3 to 5 third window, meaning older content or content that after watching, we just have a frank conversation with the filmmaker saying, look, there's not a lot we can do with this, and pretty much anybody else you'd take it to wouldn't be able to do a heck of a lot with it either. It's got issues with X, Y, and Z, and this is why we feel this way. If you like, we would take this out, but we would really just be doing a straight aggregation and low-tier SVOD and AVOD release on this, and maybe a little bit of physical media, MOD, here and there. But as such, our recoupable expenses will be very low, and you'll still be paid from the first deal by us. And that's basically where it would be, whereas it's a very different thing when we're talking about acquiring an A-level release. So, yeah, that's but we still do want to help filmmakers we see promise in not get chewed up and spit out by the bad sales agents out there. So we would still do what we can, but what we can do is highly dependent on what we were brought. And there is one other thing that I would like to add before letting Colleen talk a little bit more about development on this is that part of the reason that we're really excited to actually have a development arm is that after going through the distribution process with filmmakers who bring us their first feature or second feature or however many features, if we like working with them, we start moving them over to the development arm. We're already doing that with the filmmaker from our first film.
Oh, cool.
So it's just once they've become tested by doing their first feature, it's incredibly easier for us to pitch them to a lot of our higher level contacts because we can already show a track record for them. And so it ends up as a mutually beneficial arrangement.
For sure.
And we already know that they're going to be good to work with because we've already worked with them.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So Colleen, did you have anything to add to that in terms of development?
Yeah, so I would say January of this year, if you had asked me this and we had this interview then, I would say I want to do 2 movies a year. And that is actually what I had told Ben when we first started talking about forming a company. And then, all of a sudden March hits and we're in this pandemic. So everything kind of got put on hold. We were all set to start pitching things at studios when all this hit. So I would say my goal is this year to have something shot by the end of this year. And then, see how next year goes. But we're kind of pivoting a little bit because some of the films I'm not sure we'll be able to shoot until there's some sort of vaccine in place. Like DB Cooper takes place on an airplane. So maybe we may not be able to shoot that one realistically in the next year. But some of our other projects that I'm pivoting to are ones that we could shoot in the next year if you quarantine the crew and the cast, prior to shooting. So yeah, I'd say overall my goal is to do 2 a year in normal days.
So will you each be responsible for a number of films, or that would be the whole output of Mutiny in terms of development?
I think we could probably do it depends on exactly how involved we are in development, because there are a couple of different things we can do with development. Some of that would be like, there would be certain projects that we'd be more likely to essentially sell off to a network when have very limited involvement after that. And if we can do, and the amount of time we need to do those is very different from the ones that we're actively involved in production ourselves, to some degree. And I think that is, so I think that our output will depend on what we need to do on each project, which is something that some people may consider just like a duh stance, but it's more complicated than you'd think in some measures.
So like co-productions and partnering with other production companies that might have a project on, that's something that you're open to?
Yeah, definitely. It just depends on what they need from us and what we like. I don't see us ever being a full production company. I can sell us being a development company. We are already. I can see us being a distribution company. We are already. I don't ever think we really want to play in the middle of that. I think that we would be more likely to develop a network of strong production houses and production companies that we work with to actually do the filmmaking itself after we've packaged it and gotten it funded for them, basically. And it's just more where our skill sets lie. That sound about right, Colleen?
Yeah, for sure. And I think bringing up Debbie Brubaker again, we kind of have her on board to do the, manage the productions themselves. Whenever we can, we would work with Debbie. But yeah, really, I see my job as just bringing everything together, making, bringing the right talent to each project and really doing justice to the script and the writer itself.
So your distribution strategy might change, or you're going to keep your same distribution strategy that you've been using?
For now, I think that's going to be it moving forward. It's going to depend a lot on how well the first year goes, frankly. If it goes extremely well, and we're in a financial position, we can afford to scale up and take more films and bigger risks, we probably will. But at some point, we're going to max out on what our team's capable of to give each film the attention it needs, and we don't want to move beyond that.
Sure.
And it's at least not until we can find reliable staff to help with that. But that's way too early to talk about, frankly.
Yeah, for sure.
Because we're like 3 weeks in, so
no doubt. Well, that's exciting. That's where it really gets cool.
Yeah, we're 3 weeks in, Ben. It seems like we've been together for months.
I mean, we kind of have been. We were 3 weeks from pop.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really cool, guys. I mean, I'm really excited to see what you will do. It's nice to see another company taking a leap into faith-oriented films and to see what you do with them, because I think this is a genre that has boundless potential, and we've only begun to scratch the surface. So it's just great to have another voice out there that's allowing this kind of thing to take place.
We are looking for we are currently reviewing projects, both completed and in development. And you can submit, if you happen to be listening to this podcast and have one, you can reach out to us via submissions@mutinypictures.com. If it's development, please do not attach a script. We will request one if you want one, if we want one rather, and we will actually send you a clearance form before we will take one from you. If you send it without that, we will just delete the email and delete and block the email without opening. I wish we could be nicer about that, but we really can't.
No, there's legal issues around that for sure. So you're looking to have people pitch you by phone or by document, like a pitch document or query letter, that sort of thing?
Query letters are good. Treatments are good on development. If you have lookbooks or decks or anything like that, that would be great for development. Colleen, am I forgetting anything?
Now that, I usually start with a logline and synopsis, and I go through it with, I have a couple of people that help me look over because I get so many submissions. So I would start with a logline and synopsis, and then if I find it interesting, I would do a deeper dive and ask for a lookbook or some sort of treatment.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and on the completed end, we'd want to see a logline, genre, trailer if you have it, screener definitely, either way. If it's completed, we really do need to have a screener. We prefer a password-protected Vimeo link if it's possible. Unlisted YouTube can work, but it's better to do the Vimeo for basically everyone. And just as an idea here, because I know a lot of people get a little sketchy about sending screeners like that, even if we were to be able to find a way to download that screener, there is nothing we could do with it. It is the file type we would get from it is useless to us. So that just information for you. But
Good. Anything else on your mind?
No, Todd, I think that's really great that you have this podcast for this audience. I was excited when Ben introduced me to you because of my experience on Passion of the Christ. It's always been in the back of my mind. This movie somewhat changed the trajectory of my personal career. I just saw that there was such a demand out there for a movie like this. And it's shocking to me that there hasn't been one since, and it's so long at this stage. So I think I find it admirable that you have this podcast, and I hope anyone listening that has a story they're excited to tell and wants to bring passion to the project, that they would be in good hands with us. We definitely would do it well. I think with the four of us, our minds together on it. So please feel free to reach out.
Well, you guys you got a lot of experience, and desire for this thing. So it's I'm sure it will be in good hands with you guys.
Well, thank you.
I thank you for including me in your launch of this new effort. I wish you great luck with this, and please keep me up to date on what you're doing and what's being released.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for taking the time. This is really great, Todd.
You can find Mutiny Pictures on the web at mutinypictures.com. If you want to submit a logline and synopsis to them, you can send an email to submissions@mutinypictures.com. This information will be included in the show notes of this episode, as well as a link to my previous interview with Ben Yennie in episode 33. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Ministry of Motion Pictures podcast. You'll find us on the web at ministryofmotionpictures.org.
What we do in life echoes in eternity.